Thank you very much for having me. So let's talk about why first pages are so important. Okay, for one thing, they introduce the story, and obviously that is in fiction, but sometimes it's also in nonfiction as well, especially when you're trying to make a point and you're doing that through story, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Secondly, they should introduce the protagonist or the main character, and obviously that is in fiction. They introduce the reader to the subject and how it will be addressed. That is in nonfiction. They introduce the author's voice. We're going to talk more about what voice is, in case you're like, I'm familiar with that term. They introduce the author's tone, and they introduce the book's theme. So why are first pages so important? There's actually one other reason. I'm going to hit that at the very end, but just to go back over it again, they introduce the story. They should introduce the protagonist right up front. And if you are writing romance, how many of you write romance? Anyone? Okay, very good. Back there, all right. They should introduce the two protagonists, the male, the female protagonist, typically to each other. If it's in nonfiction, they introduce the reader to the subject and how it will be addressed. You kind of know up front with nonfiction how the writer intends to address the subject matter that they're going to talk to you about, and then that lets you know right up front whether or not this is the kind of book, the tone that the author has set, the voice that the author uses, if this is the kind of book in that particular genre that you want to read. And then, of course, they do introduce the author's voice, the author's tone, and then the book's theme. Okay, so moving on. All right, making sure everybody can see what is story and how does it differ from plot. We're going to start with fiction, and that is what this is about. The story is the entirety of what has happened to your characters. You will not necessarily reveal all of this when you are writing your book, your plot, but you have to know the story of your characters. You have to know everything that came before, not just what's going to happen between the covers of the book. The plot is what happens between the covers of the book. But the story is the life of the character. Now, my grandmother taught me, my grandmother was a great storyteller. She never wrote a book in her life, and she could hardly write English. But she taught me that if you know your character, then you will know their story. And part of that is in knowing their story. Sit down, write it out. If you have a character with a scar on her forehead, where did that scar come from? How old was the character when they fell on their bicycle? Was it because they were running from someone? Was somebody taunting them? Were they being bullied? Or were they just this, carefree, haphazard kind of a kid that never saw any danger anywhere and went careening down a cliff and ended up with a horrible gash over his forehead? What happened? That will tell you something about the actual character, and then that leads itself into the plot. The book I'm working on right now for NaNoWriMo, the book that I'm working on right now, the main male character is a daredevil. He always has been from the time he was a little boy. And I wrote out all kinds of things that his parents thought they would never, ever see him to adulthood because of the things that he had done. And we probably all know, if we haven't already raised someone who is exactly like that. So what I know about Wesley, all the things that I know about Wesley that his mother told me, are not necessarily going to go in the book, but they certainly form his character. The plot, again, is what you as the author determine to put within the covers of the book. This is the story. This is this part of their story, the overall story, that you are choosing to tell. Okay. When introducing a subject, and this is in nonfiction to the reader, consider beginning with a story. So I'm going to share a few openings for you that I think are exemplary of what it is that I'm trying to say here. So this is a book called The Final Race. It is written by a pastor named Eric Eichinger, and it is about the story of Eric Liddell. How many of you know who Eric Liddell was? How many of you saw the movie Chariots of Fire? Okay. Eric Liddell was the man who refused to run on Sunday. And Eric Eichinger is an Eric Liddell expert. But he's not a writer. He's a pastor, but not necessarily an accomplished writer. So Tyndale Publishing called me in and asked me if I would work with him on this book. And it was such an honor to do this. But this is nonfiction. This is a bio. So let me tell you how we started it. July 19th, 1924. Journalists crowded London's King's Cross railway station platform like hunters in mid-stalk. They milled around, searching the faces of passengers urgently headed toward their respective train compartments. Their office-issued pads and nubby No. 2 pencils were poised to jot down the perfect quote, which by morning's print and with the right framing would become the next sports page headline. Cameramen, not to be outdone, vied from equal vantage points. They readied their flashbulbs in hope of seizing their unsuspecting victim and, in doing so, capturing their prize, an exclusive photograph of the nation's most recently crowned hero. They had not been so lucky earlier that warm Saturday afternoon at the Stamford Bridge track, where a special relays meet between the British Empire and the United States of America had been held. Eric Liddell, the newly minted 400-meter gold medal champion, was to run in the relay only a week into his Olympic glory. Because his medal still had not arrived by mail, the sheen of his athleticism had yet to hang around his neck. The article. But this book is called All Over But the Shoutin'. And this is his story of growing up dirt poor with an alcoholic father and an abused mother, and then going on to become a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. And this is how he begins this work of nonfiction. I used to stand amazed and watch the redbirds fight. They would flash and flutter like scraps of burning rags through a sky unbelievably blue, swirling, soaring, plummeting. On the ground, they were a blur of feathers stabbing for each other's eyes. I have seen grown men stop what they were doing, stop pulling corn, or lift their head out from under the hood of a broken-down car to watch it. Once, when I was little, I watched one of the birds attack its own reflection in the side mirror of a truck. It hurled its body again and again against that unyielding image until it pecked a crack in the glass, until the whole mirror was smeared with blood. It was as if the bird hated what it saw there and discovered too late that all it was seeing was itself. I asked an old man who worked for my Uncle Ed, a snuff-dipping man named Charlie Bivens, why he reckoned that bird did that. He told me it was just its nature. So that's a perfect way to get into his story, because his story is about beating yourself up, never thinking you're good enough because of where you came from. And that was a perfect way for him to start that. This is a book that I discovered last year, just about a year and a month ago. I was very honored to be chosen as one of 12 to sit at the feet of Robert Benson. And I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Benson, but he is a contemplative. He is a best-selling author. That man, if he wrote a grocery list, I'd buy it. And I had the honor of sitting under his tutelage for a week, and we were all supposed to bring the book that inspired us the most. And there was a young man there who was a Lutheran pastor, and he brought this book. It's called Open Secrets by Richard Leisher. And we were just supposed to throw the books on the table, and then you could pick up a book and read it while you were there. And I not only started reading it, I ended up buying it on Amazon, and it was waiting for me when I got home. But this was about his first adventures, Richard Leisher's, his first adventures into being a pastor at a small church. And you know, when you graduate from seminary, you think you're going to save the world, and he found out differently. So this is the way he started it. He titled the chapter, Egypt. I had a parish in a small town in southern Illinois, not far from the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers, where the Missouri shows brown and the Mississippi foams yellow, and the two make a big river the color of cream soda. Isn't that great?
Yes.
The farms in my parish rested on the American bottom at the southernmost tip of the great Illinois prairie. The land was flattened by a prehistoric ocean several millennia ago, then smoothed by a glacier, and finally turned black as onyx by the rivers. Isn't that a great opening? And that's nonfiction. Okay, one more. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to study the voices of other writers. You know, read and stop long enough to, you know, and I don't know about you, but it's kind of hard for me. It's got to be a really good book to hook me and keep me hooked now, because I start studying their style. Oh, how did they do that? Oh, what is that voice? Oh, what is that tone? You know, I start looking for those things. But do that, and write it down. What is it about that writer's work that makes you go, yes, that is exactly what I was looking for. That was what I expected out of this writer. So now we're going to talk about tone. What is tone? Tone is the author's attitude or feelings about what they've written. You can tell whether or not an author, make sure I don't leave this, I might have said something. You can tell how the author feels about a subject. Now, I want to tell you why I chose this book cover here. I actually edited this book, and it just came out 2 days ago. This is a story that is about a child psychologist who works primarily with sexually abused children and just familially abused children. And it's largely based on her work as a child psychologist. She's retired now. She took a lot of her cases. She made them convoluted so nobody could come back and sue her later. And she's telling some amazing stories here. But when she first started the book, and I first got the book, and I knew I wanted it, but when I first got it, one of the things that concerned me was it starts off with the main character driving to work in her BMW. The top is down, the wind is blowing her hair. She stops in her in the parking lot. She checks her lipstick and her eye makeup, and she's like all upset about the fact that she's got a couple of crow's feet and that kind of thing. And then she bebops into her office, and I said, "Is this supposed to be funny? Is this book supposed?" I thought this book was serious. And she said, "No, it's very serious about child abuse." I said, "Really?" Because I thought it was funny. I mean, it was like chick lit. So what we did was we went and pulled a bunch of titles at Amazon that were much like this tone that she was looking for. And you know how you can look inside? We read the first pages. And then I pulled her into things like chick lit and things like romance and other genres so she could see how the tone was different. So I said to her, "Marilyn, how do you feel about children who are sexually abused?" She said, "It sickens me." Of course it sickens me. I said, "Then this tone needs to be serious from the word go." And so she rewrote it to this. On the day Jillian Reynolds came to her first visit at the mental health clinic I owned along Port Arthur's Main Street, I had arrived only minutes earlier. I'd parked my car, rushed through the back door, and travel mug of hot tea from home clutched securely in one hand, stood in my treatment room and looked around, making sure everything was in order for the day. What a difference it was. She immediately got to the crux of the issue. We're about to meet someone whose children are abused. And it was gripping, and it's gripping all the way through. But the frou-frou stuff just didn't fit. What is your tone? It is your attitude or your feelings about the subject you are writing about. If you're flippant about it, then your reader's going to think you're flippant about it because that's what they're going to read. But if you're serious about it, then they'll understand that as well. An author's tone can be anything. It can be formal, it can be informal, it can be happy, it can be sad, it can be morose, it can be jovial, it can be angry, it can be pensive. I mean, any emotion that you have, that's what your tone can be. All right, so what is theme versus subject? The book's theme is the main idea, and it's stated either directly or indirectly. There is a difference in theme and subject, which is the topic that acts as a foundation. The subject is a topic that acts as a foundation. Theme is the opinion of the author expressed on the subject. My opinion is that if you've got unforgiveness in your heart, you better get it out. You better figure out what it is or it will destroy you. It will sit like a root like a seed under the soil, and then someday somebody's going to come along and water it, and it's going to sprout. And then you're going to have to deal with it. I believe that fervently. I've seen it over and over and over in my lifetime. And that's what the Ornament Keeper is about. That's how I feel about it. For example, if a writer believes that all love is doomed, anybody ever read Shakespeare? That may be exactly what you find in each of his or her writings. Another example is Nicholas Sparks. Nicholas Sparks, it seems, always writes about the tenderness of love and then letting it go. Interesting, he got a divorce after several books came out. So, going back to this, how is theme expressed? It's expressed through the actions and attitudes of the characters, through the thoughts of the characters. Now, let me ask you this. How many of you are familiar with the term deep POV? Good. Because one of the things that we're finding in publishing, and I've kind of graduated, I still write, but I'm also within the publishing world now. One of the things that we are finding is we want less and less of that internal thought. We want it to be deep third-person thought. We don't want that first-person italicized thought anymore. We want you to get into character and stay in character. We want you to slip into that character's skin and let us know what that character is seeing and smelling and hearing and touching and feeling and here. One of the things that I tell my clients is this. If you are in character and you are writing and the phone rings and you can answer as you're not in character. You should not be able to answer the phone as you if you're in character. I put my phone on silent and actually on Do Not Disturb, and only my children or my husband can get through. It's got that special little feature. Because if they call, I will definitely answer it. But nobody else better bother me because I'm not me right now. I'm somebody else. The third way is through the conversations between the characters, through the experiences of the characters, and then through the narrative. And that's what's happening in between your plot points. That's your narrative. Finally, first pages are important because they introduce the book to a prospective agent or editor. Now I want to tell you a story, I'm going to end with this, about this book. It's by Claire Fullerton. It's called Morning Dove. As I said, I'm on the publishing side of things now, as well as being on the writing side, but I'm on the publishing side. I only publish Southern fiction, by the way. So if you've got a book about something that happened in Washington State, I can't help you. But I received an email from Claire Fullerton, and it said, so-and-so told me that I should contact you about my book, Morning Dove, my manuscript. And she went on to tell me a little bit about it, and then she had the entire first chapter in the email. Well, I knew immediately she did not have an agent, and I only work with agented authors. And so I very kindly sent an email back and said, do you have an agent? Knowing the answer was going to be no, but just wanting to be kind. And sure enough, within about 2 minutes, she emailed me back and she said no, that she did not have an agent. Do I need one? She said. Well, I emailed her back and I talked to her about, and this is for the gentleman who's a visitor here. There you are. And I talked to her about going to writers' conferences and meeting with agents. That's how you get an agent today. And I was just going to, say to her, when you find an agent, contact me again. I'm sure it's a lovely book. But something tickled me and said, you're the president of Word Weavers International. You work with new writers all the time. Show some grace, girl. Show some grace. Read a chapter. Read a page of a chapter. Give her something. Say to her, I like your first line. And your margins look good. So I started reading. And this is the way it begins. These are first pages. I used to go home every Christmas to the house I grew up in, and Finley would be there, eventually anyway. He'd come swaggering in, all blue-eyed, gray, three-quarter coat swinging, in from Virginia, the educated man, all beaming, charismatic, 6'2" of him, setting the stage in that rambling southern house simply by virtue of his presence. It was that way every year because Finley was the kind of guy who could enter a room and take over completely. My brother was that magnetic. Finley was born 18 months ahead of me, so I came into the world following his lead. Mom told me in one of her rare confessional moments that Finley was an accidental pregnancy, but that I had been planned. I remember furrowing my brow and thinking it odd. If anybody had a God-given significant purpose for being on earth, it's Finley. Compared to him, everyone else is a random afterthought, including me. Finley fascinated me. I used to study him, the way he walked, the way he talked, the way the air changed around him. He was absolutely something. But here's what bothers me. Finley's in heaven, and I don't know why. Delete, 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 delete. You don't have an agent? No. Are you home right now? Yes. Are you going to be home the rest of the day? Yes. Stay put. Picked up the phone, called an agent friend of mine from Tennessee, because this was Memphis. And by that afternoon, Claire Fullerton had an agent, and within a week, I had a signed contract. And we published Morning Dove. That's how important. That's how important first pages are.
Is the rest of the book that good?
Oh, honey, please. She has won. It came out in, I think, April or May. She's won so many awards. It's just stunning.
Wow.
I mean, she's just, in fact, the publisher said, she just won another one this week, and the publisher said, I need a list. We can't keep up with it anymore. It is absolutely fabulous. It is fabulous. But if that first page had not been that good, I would have just said, if you ever get an agent, contact me. So that's why they're so important. They grab publishers, they grab editors, they grab agents, and in the end they grab readers. Because if you can't get them past this, those first few pages, you can't get them to the rest of the book. And then it doesn't matter what your theme is, it doesn't matter what your tone is, it doesn't matter what your message is, they never got it. Now, on that note, and as I conclude, that does not mean that your first pages, or even your first chapters, and this is what we find very often, the first 3 chapters are fabulous, and after that it just nosedives. Because you've worked on those first 3 chapters, and you've worked on them, and you've worked on them, and then you just, said, okay, I'm just going to let the rest go. Don't do that. The rest of the book has to be as good as the first part of the book, just like you said. Is the rest of it that good? Yes, it is.